quick show of hands. How many of you put your phone on your charger when your battery gets down to 23%?
I started on the charger when it's down to 80.
When it's at 80? Who goes lower? Oh my goodness.
Not really.
Well, in 2008.
It turns red and it tells me that it's
In 2008, our Snowy Plover survey crew documented about 5,500 snowy plover at Great Salt Lake. At that time, it was the largest breeding population in North America. And since then, we've had a lot of issues with Great Salt Lake, as you're probably well aware. It has reached its historic, it has passed the historic low and is now at a level at which it's no longer functioning as it should. And that 5,500 represented about 23% of North America's population. And so hopefully we're going to see that everything is good and the population is doing well. But it could be below 23%, in which case we need to put it on a charger. So today what we're going to do is go through the protocol that we used back in 2008 to identify or to determine, estimate the number of snowy plover. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about its overall status. Then we'll talk a little bit about our survey results and how that was designed, why it was designed as it was, and then our field methods, and then we'll spend a little time talking about how to identify it. They're very secretive, so they're hard to see. So we're going to have to really work at that. And then we're going to go outside and practice distance estimation. There's a measurement of 100 meters that if you can estimate, they'll really save a lot of time. So that's what we're going to practice. By the way, I'm John Cavett. I'm a professor of ornithology here at Weaver. And for another month, I'm acting associate dean, but we'll be transitioning back to the classroom after that. So I'm very happy about that. Nika, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Niku. I'm the research coordinator here at the Avian Ecology Lab. So I will be helping out all volunteers and kind of arranging things for you guys.
Yeah, so anyway, let's start off and talk a little bit about the overall status of snowy plover. I'm going to turn this down a little, all right? So the snowy plover, its population for quite a while has been in trouble. The Pacific Coast population is listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and it has been since the early 90s. That population, incidentally, is about 2,500. And it is not recovered as they had hoped it would. Here, within the interior, the populations are not considered endangered, but they are all listed in some sort of conservation priority from a whole host of different organizations. So the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Utah DWR, the Nature Conservancy, WISRN, the Western Hemisphere Shore Reserve Network, all have a category of concern for this interior population. The significance of this bird is that we really need to understand what the current population size is in order for us to determine what types of mitigation might be needed for the species and the habitat and so forth. This bird is a very odd bird, and it's living basically on the edges, right? It's living in a very, very harsh environment. On the salt flats and the playas of Great Salt Lake and other saline lakes and alkaline lakes throughout North America and into Mexico. So it is always probably going to be fairly low in numbers, okay? But then when you compound that with the issues that are going on at Great Salt Lake, it creates a serious problem. And we're not only dealing, unfortunately, with just a receding lake at Great Salt Lake, but we're also dealing with encroachment of Phragmites onto the playas, onto those salt flats, where this is where their very breeding locations are. So this particular species is considered an indicator species to let us know what the health of that playa system of that lake is. So its habitats, as I mentioned, are very, very harsh conditions. They're dealing with a very alkaline soil. They have very limited water, freshwater resources. And so we find that that's where they tend to be found. Freshwater seeps, springs, and so forth that are coming into the Great Salt Lake. That, incidentally, is also where we get Phragmites growing quite heavily. So we have lost a good deal of the playa habitat because of that. If we look at some of the other areas in which they will nest, throughout parts of Oklahoma, Oregon, and so forth, they will nest also in some of these dredge spoils or river bars, sandy shoreline, certainly along the Pacific coast. But they're always within an area that's very, very devoid of vegetation. In fact, we've done habitat studies where we find anything over 20% of vegetation along the soil is a place they exclude. So less than 20% is favored for their habitat selection. So we have vegetation that's very, very sparse or limited. Salicornia, if you've ever seen Salicornia, very, very interesting little plant. And less than 20% vegetative cover. All these in this area are low-growing, salt-tolerant plants. We have some substrate characteristics. These are features of the nesting areas for the species that we came up with. A former student of mine did. They're obviously in an open, flat terrain, very sandy surfaces with minimal slope. The other thing is that they're very, very good at locating near fresh water. So that's typically where we find them, and it's pretty much less than 300 meters from a nesting site to a freshwater source. So that's where they're going to be concentrated for the most part. Shallow water feeding areas. So they like these sheet flows. As a stream or something comes out onto the lake, it opens up. You get a very, very thin flow of water. And that's a very, very advantageous place for them. All right. So at Great Salt Lake, they're migratory. And from our banding studies and so forth, we've determined that they're flying to Southern California, into very, very northern parts of Baja California as well, where they winter. And so there is a bit of intermixing with the Pacific Coast population. And we do have quite a bit of genetic exchange between the two populations. They arrived back here in Utah in mid-March, and right away we begin to see our first nest about a month later. So from Kristen Ellis's paper on nest predation, we determined from about 600 nests that we monitored that first The very first nest that we had in our study was April 17th. So that's mid-April. So they're nesting now, right? They should have young if they don't pretty soon. And then they'll nest all the way through July, mid-July, and then they will take off in August and September. Okay? So we have a window of our survey that incorporates the peak nesting period for the species. And the reason we do that is because we want to make sure that they're tied to a particular area so that they're not moving all around the lake. They're very territorial, and so once they've established a territory, they'll remain within that area. That's going to be very proximal to their food resources and water, all of that. So they will stay on their territory, and that allows us to protect ourselves from double counting. Okay, so we strategically want to do this during that territorial time period where they're not moving all over the lake. So we're in that May 15th to June 15th is going to be the survey time period, which is pretty much right in the middle of their nesting season. Okay, so the very odd thing, but it's an adaptation, is that this species is very, very flexible in parental care. So the male and female can shift off in terms of who dominates in terms of the incubation of the eggs. In some populations, it's the male primarily, others it's the female. In addition, their breeding strategy is quite variable. We can find a typical monogamous one male, one female pair, but we also have pairs that are sequentially polygynous, meaning you will have a male that's going to mate with multiple females. Or we can have sequential polyandry. That's where a female is going to mate with multiple males. So what she will do, she will lay the eggs, she will then incubate them. Then when they hatch, the male takes the young, the chicks, and will keep them for several weeks, and she's off trying to find another male to start another nest with. So these kind of strategies are, again, an adaptation for this very harsh, unpredictable type of an environment. They're very, very, their strategies are very, very heavily based on the type of environment that they're in. We have extreme temperature ranges during incubation, for example. If you've ever touched your hand on the playa at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer, it is burning. And they put their nests right in scrapes that have very little insulation at all. They'll have a few pebbles at the bottom, and that's about it. So they have a very, very difficult time maintaining egg temperature, so they have to shade the eggs a lot, and you will often find them actually putting their nests near an object. We think it's to provide some type of shade for the eggs. The territory size of bird is between a half to a hectare. And that's about 1 to 2.5 acres. And if you think about it, the best way I can remember that is about the size of a soccer field. So that's the territory size that we're dealing with, okay? So that soccer field is about 0.7 hectares. The positioning of the nest is quite variable, but for the most part, we see it's more centrally located. So the nest is kind of centrally located within the territory. And the male is the one that does the majority of the territorial defense. And they can be very, very aggressive. You might see bouts of chasing one another. They even will attack other young. They will kill other young. So they're very, very aggressive. They maintain that territory all throughout that nesting period. So that is our great thing that we can count on, because they'll stay there and we don't have to worry about double counting outside of the clusters that we sample. All right. So in 2008, the Fish and Wildlife Service wanted to do a continent-wide survey of snowy plover. And the Pacific Coast population wasn't included because it is so intensively monitored that they know they have about every bird marked. So they know what the population is. But in the interior, there was little information at all. People had speculated, but there was no coordinated effort to do that. So I coordinated with students and folks from DWR the 2007 and 8 survey at Great Salt Lake. Most of the sites that were surveyed during that time period were what we call list sites. And they were sites that were very small, isolated areas where you could go in and count every single bird. Great Salt Lake and Salt Plains were two sites that were not that way. It is so massive and extensive, it's really not feasible at all to do a complete count. If you were to try, you would have a very difficult time trying to cover all of that area within a short period of time that they're nesting. It is massive, right? So we utilized what's called a random sampling technique. And so let me explain how that works. If you look at the habitat of snowy plover around the lake, you would see that there's probably 3 gradations of it. There's really good prime habitat, where we're likely to find them anytime we go in those kind of habitat. There's kind of a marginal and then a less optimal. So there's 3 different levels that we define. So a number of biologists sat around a big map of Great Salt Lake and identified these 3 different strata. And so within those strata, we were then going to put our locations. And we do that randomly. So we randomly choose a total of maybe 500 different locations around the lake. 70% of them are in the prime great habitat, 20% in that mid zone, and 10% in the low quality. Okay? We want to make sure that we're sampling that entire area because we don't know for sure, right? And we want to do it randomly. So we have a GIS just randomly pull 500 points, 70% in one, 20 in another, and 10 in the other. And so those are our high, medium, and low categories. Those then are our sampling locations. And they are truly spread out all across the lake. So I'll show you, I think I have it on this slide here. So these little dots represent the locations from 2008 in just Antelope Island and Ogden Bay area right there. So the red ones are the high value locations. And that's quite a bit of, that's quite a few of those clusters. Now, then from those points, survey crews would go out. We just visit them one time during that site or during that time period, and we just try to get to as many as we can until the end of June or the end of the survey. Back in 2008, we were able to get 350 or so locations done. And when we do that, we know the area that we are surveying these birds in. Each cluster represents a 100-hectare site. So you're going to survey within a 100-hectare area. And so we'll then determine how many birds are in those, and then subtract out the habitat in that cluster that's not suitable for bird. And then we can get our population estimate. Last time, in 2008, we surveyed about 10% of the available habitat for stony plover. Okay, and that's our goal, is to get to 10% this time as well. When we did that, this is what we found. So the entire population in the interior is about 25,000, and we're somewhere around 5,000. It, at the time, was the highest breeding population. Salt Plains kicked up there that year a little bit, but we still beat them. And it represented about 21 to 23% of the North American population. And that's kind of scary if you think about it. A species that is so dependent on one site that a quarter of the population is tied to it. There's not a lot of other saline lakes available. And so that's what we got for those population estimates then. All right, so you should have your protocol with you. If you don't, there's more copies up front here. But if you would turn to the very last pages are the figures. And if you look at page 12, you'll see a blank form like that. This is our cluster. Okay, this is our 100-hectare site. Each of these squares is 200 meters by 200 meters. Okay. Now, when you do a survey like this, you want to make sure that you're covering that entire area, and we want to make sure that we are assigning birds that are in that area to that area, and not counting birds that are outside. Okay? So if we had our cluster of 200 or 100 hectares up here, like this, you are going to be given a location of that cluster. And you can see on this grid map here that you have numbers all around there. Those numbers represent coordinates, and we use the UTM system. It's very similar to the lat long, but it's labeled differently. Okay. So if you're not familiar with the GPS unit, we're going to be getting you very, very familiar. You'll love it after a while because it's very simple, very easy, straightforward. But you're going to have to navigate to the location. We go out in teams of 2, and you're given a stack of probably a couple, maybe 2 or 3 clusters to try to get to. All right, and you're going to navigate to that location. You'll have an overview, an overmap, like showing up there with the clusters numbered. Each has a separate number. You're going to navigate to the location, and then you're going to determine from wherever you came from, and say we have those other cells there, where to start. But you don't want to walk through the plot, okay? So if you come from this side here, we're going to start at this end. You can start down here, any of the corners, all right? And you're going to start at the midpoint of the first cell. How many meters to the midpoint of that cell? 100 meters. So 100 meters gets you to that midpoint there, and you have a cell that's 200 by 200. Okay? You're just going to walk through the middle of that cell and periodically stop and scan with your binoculars. We're not using any vocalizations, we're not playing anything. That would mess us up, right? We're not doing that. We're listening. 9 times out of 10, that's how I see a snowy plover, is by hearing it first. They're very vocal when they are nesting and territorial. And you will show you or play some of those songs for you in the calls. But you're going to stop periodically, and I would stop about every 50 meters or so. Okay, so you're going to walk 50 meters. Now for me, and I would do this for yourself, but one big step is a meter. And so you can figure that way, or you can use your GPS as well. But obviously, if you're hearing birds, I would stop and look around to see where they are. You want to know how many are in each cell, okay? And we don't want to double count. So that's the tricky part. You might have maybe 3 pairs that have portions of their territory in that cluster, all right? And you don't want to double count birds as they're moving around. So you're going to have to kind of pay attention to where they are and what they're doing. And so you do a quick sweep, see how many you've got, try to identify what cell they're in, all right? And then you'll record that information, and you'll just do this whole cluster, okay? Now, when you do that, I think I have an example of this on here. So I have 2 here for you. One is on page 13, and then a very, very small, squiggly, tiny writing is on the back side of that 14. And I bet you I can figure out who that is. John Neal. He's very good at that. You can make out exactly what he's talking about here, though. So, I would use this as an example, because this is actually field data. This particular plot, notice that we want to know if there are areas there that the birds can't use. Okay, there might be water on the plot, which would not be a place that they could nest, right? There could be sagebrush or a lot of vegetation such that they wouldn't use that. Okay, so we want you to identify those areas and mark them on the map, because what we will do is then when we come back to calculate the density estimates, so we subtract out that portion that is not usable by the bird, so that we can get a density of birds within our usable habitat. Okay? So, if you look at John's plot here, he started the very faint dotted line down in this corner here. Okay? And you can follow that. He went to the next cell over because he couldn't survey the second cell in that transect area or any of that rest of those columns. And then move through the plot. We have codes that you'll see on page 15, which is the data for. Okay, so you have 2 parts that are going with each cluster. You have the map that you're creating and the cluster form. This is going to have about everything that this is going to have on it, right? But this is going to be in a much more organized way. This is going to be drawn onto the map. So you see that he wrote W in those cells. That means that there was water there. Okay, and if you look on his sample data sheet, which is on 16, you can see the proportion of the cell that's not surveyed. And then the question is why, and so that's when you put your data code. And you can see up at the top here, we have different codes, or up above that, it says vegetation code and why not survey. We want to know what each square is, okay? So it could be barren, so that's less than 10% vegetation. And you're just going to estimate, right? So you imagine you're looking at a square meter on the ground, and you estimate what proportion of that is covered by vegetation. And what some people try to do is they imagine being able to take all that vegetation and kind of push it together. What would that be relative to that meter square? Okay. So estimating, pardon? Did anybody have a question? So you're estimating what that area is that is bare ground. You could also have a sparse vegetated area, so that's between 10 to 30%, and then vegetated greater than 30%, and then shallow water. Shallow meaning that very, very small sheet flow, where they're going to be moving into and they're going to be foraging. Okay. Then we have the why not surveyed line, and that's due to water, anything above that small sheet flow. If it's heavily vegetated or you have upland habitat, okay, that would be your reasons why you wouldn't survey, okay? When you find a bird, you will mark it on your map, and then later, after you're done, you will mark it on the sheet. So what I urge you to do is just go through your cluster with your map, putting all the data on here. And then when you get done, you can fill in and take the time to figure out what all these should be. Okay? Remember that we are only recording adults. Okay? Only adults. We don't need to spend time what their sex is or what their behavior is, just that they're there. Okay? They're likely to have young, and you'll see probably young running around, but or hopefully. But we don't count them, and I know it hurts because you're like, there's the next generation. But you can't do it. All right? You can put that on our other form. We have a daily form that you're going to fill out. It's going to tell us what plots you got to, when you left, when you got back, so forth. Okay? Then you'll also have the top part of here to fill out, and that indicates the weather. We have some very strict requirements here. We don't want to do any kind of surveys when we have high winds. That is going to mess up our ability to detect the birds, for one, and two, they often don't move around as much. So that's going to bias our study if we have days in which they're not as detectable as others. So we want to make sure we're less than 15 miles per hour, no heavy rain or precipitation, okay? And we don't want any of these fog or dust storms that break out every once in a while. So you don't survey there either. The other thing is that we want to make sure that the birds are, or that we are able to detect them, right? So we are going to assume that you have 100% detectability of snowy plover in each 200 square cell, okay? So we ran that test in 2007 to figure out what our detectability was. And it turns out that we are very, very close to 100% if we follow these guidelines. The other thing that we have to watch out for is glare. Okay? So midday, it's very difficult to see the birds. First of all, it's difficult to see these guys to begin out there on those salt flats, right? They are very cryptically colored. So they're very, very similar to their environment. And unless they're moving around, it's very difficult to see them. So we need to make sure that there's no glare. So we want to minimize the middle part of the day. We don't want to use that, okay? So you can start a half hour after sunrise and go until around 11 o'clock, and then stop, and we can have another crew come out, or you could go back after about 2 and work until about whatever, half hour before sunset, okay? And those time periods will give us the best opportunity for detecting snowy plover. So as a field worker, a field researcher, you've got to be paying attention to what the weather conditions are, kind of know what the forecast is, because if you get started on a plot and you don't get through, and you get a windstorm coming up, we got to come back and do it again, start it from the beginning. Because we can't come back to the plot and and do the remainder, because the birds are mixing around and it's gonna, you're likely to double count those. Okay?
But John, from the time I go from square one all the way down and back up, how do I know that bird didn't move?
Oh, you have to kind of keep your eye on them, right? You've got one over here, and he's flitting down in front of you.
They all look alike to me.
You'll get the hang on it. What you want to do is do a quick scan every time and see how many total you've got in your area, right? And you want to tie them to each cell as you're going. So if you're scanning, you see, oh, I got one down here at M, all right, and then one over there at N. And then you're going to move down there, and then you've got 2 over here at O. It's probably the same birds, right? You just got to kind of watch and continually scan and see how many birds you have all throughout.
The intent is to record them at the nest site?
No, not necessarily the nest site. In fact, don't spend any time looking for nests. We just want to tie them to a particular cell. And we're doing that for a couple of reasons. One is that's going to help you determine whether or not you've got, 6 in there or 12, right? You're going to tie them to a location area. They'll move around. They'll fly out of the cluster. They'll come back. But if they're tied to a location, they're going to use that area, and they're going to defend that from anybody else, okay? And so that's going to be very helpful to you in that. If you might come across a nest, and that's great, but we don't need to know the information on it. Definitely don't spend time at it. Don't step on it. But they're very difficult to find. I mean, you can be standing right there and not know you're right at a nest. Okay, so that's our limitations in terms of weather, time of the day, and also our survey window, May 15th to June 15th.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So if you go in the morning and then you stop around 10 a.m. or whatever, and you come back around 2 p.m., do you resume where you left off? You start over?
Well, you'll have to get that plot done. And this is a general guideline. So if you are finishing up a plot at noon, by all means finish. Get it done. Don't just stop, because if we stop, then we have to start all over again.
Oh, okay.
Some of you, or probably most of you, won't be going back in the afternoon, but we'd love it if you could. We had about 35 people last time, and we had several that were like full-time individuals. We had students from Mexico that were working for us during the summer. We had students from Kansas that were working with us for the summer, and so that was their job. So they were out every day. We don't have that this time. But I think we'll be able to get it. We're going to be very creative. DWR is going to be helping. They're going to also be shuttling us to places, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem.
I want John Hill.
Yeah, so you do go out in twos, and we'll try to assign you clusters that are somewhat similar, but we do not want two people walking through the plot, okay? So each person does their own cluster, right? And we'll set up some times, if those of you are interested, we'll actually go out to Antelope Island along the causeway, and we'll do a practice cluster, okay? We've got, that's generally a very good place for snow club. We have a fairly big group of birds that are nesting out there. I don't know anything about this year, but that's generally the place. You're going to come across probably more clusters that have no birds in them than that have birds. And that's okay. We're talking about a giant area at Great Salt Lake. So we're not expecting to have birds every time. Okay?
I thought it said something about estimation with an hour.
Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. We expect that this will take 2 hours, 120 minutes to walk through that. All right? So don't spend much longer than that. If you have to, you probably will the first couple until you get it all figured out, right? But if you're taking much longer than that, let us know so we can kind of help you, and, so we're not bogging you down. All right. What you need, binoculars, number one. Nobody is allowed spotting scopes. Obviously, spotting scopes are really good, and they're very beneficial for finding birds. But we don't have spotting scopes overall for everybody, and so consequently, nobody uses them. All right, we want to maintain our ability to detect birds as similar as we can across each person or each team. So you'll need binoculars. If you don't have any, we have some. Data sheet. So you will be given, when you go out, you'll be assigned a couple of clusters. Okay? And we will have everything arranged for you in envelopes, manila envelopes. In there, you are going to have your blank data form, right? You'll have one of these. You'll have a blank map or cluster cell. Then you'll also have a printout of the overhead kind of view of all the clusters and generally where they are, like I showed you on that other map back here. So you'll get something like this. And so you'll say, these will all have numbers by them, excuse me. So you say, okay, I'm over here by the causeway in that area. Okay? Now, Niku and I will be coordinating with all the land managers. Okay? There will be lots of clusters up at Bear River Refuge. There will be lots of clusters at Farmington Bay, at Ogden Bay. And so we're working with all those biologists and managers to get access. They will know you're coming. Okay? Some of them have different rules than others. Some of them want you to telephone and leave a message or a text that you're on Farmington Bay, for example, and then they want to know when you leave. Okay, so you'll have those instructions with your packet. Okay, we will do as best as we can to say or to get you information on how to get to those points. But some of these points are not in areas that are well managed or that the managers know how best to get them. All right? So you might come across, after walking half a mile, a huge growth of Phragmites that you cannot go through. Okay? You'll just have to try to figure out a way around it. I wouldn't go through it. Or some other way to get there. If not, you'll have other clusters that you'll go to. Okay? But we want you to be creative in a safe way. And we're going to try to do this for you. But some of the managers or some of the areas, for example, a lot of the sovereign lands, nobody's been on those parts for a long, long period of time. So it's not known whether the Phragmites have grown up there. Niku and John Neal flew the shoreline this last week, and they tried to map out all these areas that were going to be extensive to understand where they are, and we're digitizing that and then putting that into the maps.
Do we need to get gate access?
Pardon?
Do we need
Yes.
to get gate
You'll have gate access. There'll either be a key that we'll have for you, or there'll be a combination or something like that. All right? All right. I think we've got pretty much all that covered, right? So you're going to be in there for about 120 minutes, about 5 minutes per cell. You're gonna record the birds first. You're not going to record the habitat or the vegetation. Okay, you can kind of map that out as you're going, but don't spend time trying to figure out what percentage of the cell is this, that, and the other thing. All right, you can come back and kind of survey that over and get that information. Because I don't want you to miss out on the birds, right, as you're writing down and drawing maps. You want to be able to see where the birds are. All right. Let's see. You pick any random or any corner that you're closest to. You're going to start at that place. We want to know that that's your place that you're starting. You're going to do like John Neal did and do a dotted line through the cells that you went so that we can kind of retrace your route. And then you're going to, every 50 meters or so, you're going to stop, scan, move on. Okay? And then you'll be done at the end, and you'll come back and you'll fill in all the forms. Okay? All right. Any questions? Yeah.
Page 13, vegetation drawn in. There's
Yeah.
6 plants, 1 plant. What's
That is this example of, I'm guessing, what this person is doing is saying that probably all of the cell in cell D is vegetated, but only a sixth. I don't know. It's whatever they've decided is their, and I don't. This is just a contrived one by Kendra from the Fish and Wildlife Service. So, but it just is however you want to represent it to yourself. That's going to be easiest to kind of remember. Any other questions? Now you'll see the center cell is labeled here. And then the coordinates are up here. These clusters are running in a north-south direction, all right? And so you've got the first set of digits here, the top, that start with a 12. Okay, that's one set. And then the second set is underneath it there. Okay?
What page are you
on? I'm on page 13. Actually, it's on any of the maps. You see those numbers. And those represent the locations. All right? So you have 2 sets of numbers that give you a location. One is an easterly direction, east-west, and one is a north-south. As you will find out when you go out and play with the GPS units, every tick of the number is a meter. So it makes it a lot easier to use UTMs when you're out in the field. Every tick is a meter. So you'll get good at estimating distances. Okay? All right. Nico, it's all yours.
Okay,
Okay, so we're going to cover field safety procedures. I'm going to be acting as the field safety coordinator, so if anything happens, you guys have questions, anything like that, they're going to come to me first. We are going to require 2-person teams, like John mentioned. So what this would look like is you guys would be given 2 locations, hopefully close by. You'd walk the transects separately, though. So that means that you're going to have to be able to maintain communication with your partner. So whether that means you guys are using radios, using cell phones, if you have service, that kind of stuff, just to make sure that you guys are able to get back together at the end of this. So if we send 2 people out, we want 2 people coming back together, and you guys can kind of discuss what that looks like for you. So if we are going to talk about environmental monitoring, so sun exposure is a big deal, especially out in the summer in the Great Salt Lake. Like you guys know, there's not very much shade, not very much cover. Hat, sunglasses, SPF, it's going to be your best friend. I'm going to say everybody should carry at least a gallon of water with them per person. Because if you guys are out there during peak hours, it's really easy to get dehydrated. Terrain hazards, another big thing is going to be those mud flats. Some of them will be pretty hard to navigate. You're going to want to have the appropriate clothing, sturdy waterproof boots for some of those areas. Watch for unstable surfaces. Honestly, just watch where you're walking in general, right? Because we are in the middle of nesting season too, so keep that in mind. Avoid crossing any deep channels. So when it comes to weather, we don't want you guys out when it's windy or when it's raining, like we said. But say there's a day that, you know, it's not supposed to rain until the night and you want to go out in the morning, just make sure you're monitoring weather. If you start to notice thunderstorms or anything like that, if they're within 10 miles, that's the general rule to make sure you get out of there. And then the other big thing, insects. So just make sure you have appropriate clothing there, bug spray, anything like that you guys might need. Okay, so we talked about the team configuration, 2-person teams, but only 1 observer at each site. Communication either with radios or cell phones. If you guys find yourself in an emergency, obviously call 911, but if there's something that you guys want to talk about or let me know about, you will have my phone number and John's as well, but reach out to me to let me know anything that might have happened. Sun exposure is a big thing. We talked about all the weather hazards, the terrain considerations, and honestly just boils down to your guys' personal safety is our priority. If you find that you're in a situation that you don't feel comfortable in, let us know. We want to make sure that you take all the proper precautions when you go out to make sure that you're prepared for whatever may happen, right?
We didn't lose anybody in 2008.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're just smart about these things and you let us know ahead of time if anything, you need anything, then it'll be fine. Okay, so who has seen a snowy plover? Okay, so pretty much almost everybody. Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about detection tips. So most of the time you are going to hear the birds before you see the birds, right? They're, like we talked about, very hard to detect when you're looking for them. They look like rocks out there, especially at 100-meter distance. So listen first. Scan open areas. You'll notice too with snowies, it sounds like most people are experienced with them, but if you're out near a nest, watch for they'll try to lure you away from the nest. And so watch for those behavioral patterns and stuff like that. It'll make it easier to kind of nail them down to one cluster or one square. You can check habitat edges. So if you notice maybe 2 fighting males or anything like that, and you notice like different territories and stuff like that, check areas where you see a lot of vegetation, and then none, or water's edge and then none. These kinds of things are going to give you a good clue for where to look for them. They do typically cling to like the water's edge or close by in those mud flats, and nowhere near the big areas of vegetation. So those are just a couple things you can use as you're scanning to say, are they going to be over here or over here, looking for different behavioral patterns, that kind of stuff. Let me play their primary call. I don't have a speaker in here that I'm connected to, so I'm just going to play it off my phone. So they have their primary call and then some of their more alarm calls that sound more like a chirp or a crit. So listening for that as you guys are standing will definitely help kind of direct you where to look. Early morning is when they're most vocal. Late evening, there's also some increased activity. Cloudy days, there's usually going to be even more consistent activity throughout the day. And calm conditions are more conducive to detection. So there's not a ton of things out on the Great Salt Lake that look like snowy plovers. The only thing that I would say that looks a little bit like them is going to be killdeer, but there's a substantial size difference, right? So up there we have kind of just a little diagram with a ringed plover. A ringed plover is even a little bit bigger than a snowy plover, so you can tell compared to a killdeer they are quite small. So we're talking 15 to 17 centimeters in height. So they are going to stick to, or I guess let me backtrack a little bit. So they have that pale sandy appearance versus the killdeer are typically a little bit darker too. And the biggest difference when you're looking at them is the double-breasted black band, especially at a distance. If you can see that you see two of those bands, then that is going to be a big indicator. Killdeer also have a completely different call than the snowies do. Some might say annoying. It's just a little, you know. So very different than snowies. And size is probably, from a distance, going to be the biggest indicator.
Is the ringed plover in our neighborhood?
Nope.
Okay.
No, only snowies only have that up there for size comparison, just to give you an idea. So the only thing out there that is going to look similar to a plover is going to be the killdeer.
Cool.
Now, we put the horned lark on here just because when you're looking at like 100-meter distance, and you're out there, you see something in the corner of your peripheral move, and you want to know whether to detect it or whether to record it. I mean, horned larks don't look anything like plovers, but if they're just flying, you know, or you're catching a glimpse, it's really easy sometimes to mistake them just because their underside is white, they're about the right size, they have some sort of black banding, right? Completely different, like, coloring in the face and everything. But I'm going to play you that song just so that you know what that sounds like. So that if you hear this and you see something fly away, then maybe it's just the horned lark. I'll give that a second to load. But the other thing to differentiate snowies and killdeer is the way that they run. So killdeer have that run, stop pattern. They're more animated, you could say, more active than plovers. So even just like if you see something running, take a second to like actually get a good view of it before you record it, because they do have a little bit different pattern. This is the horned lark call. So definitely different. Very easy to differentiate.
Is this an error? You've got snowy run, stop, run pattern.
They do. So they have both killdeer and snowies have that run stop. So just know that if you see it, that you can't just record it. Make sure you get a good view on what you're looking at. So these are just some different field tips. Okay, so some final reminders. Just check the weather before you go out. Be prepared with any equipment you need. Review field guides. During the survey, follow the centerline path, record data immediately, maintain team contact. Consistency is going to be key to making sure that all the data is actually accurate and critical for valid comparisons. Complete your documentation, minimize disturbance, watch where you're walking, tread lightly while you guys are out there. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so we'll kind of stop there, but I just want to re-emphasize how important this is. We're dealing with the rarest of North American shorebirds, and it calls Great Salt Lake its primary home, right? And without a massive amount of people that can go out there and do it, we wouldn't have a clue. And I want to make sure that all of you guys feel comfortable about it. And some of you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. I'm a little paranoid. But we'll get you through it because we have a lot of clusters that are up there at Bear River Refuge. We'll take a big group of people out there, drop you off at different places. We also have large clusters over at Antelope and all these other places. So you're not going to be sent out into the middle of the West Desert by yourself.
So is the normal routine going to be here?
We're going to be very flexible. So it depends on how you're going to be or where you're going. All right. So the plan is that Niku and I will have the packets available for you at different places. All right. So hopefully we'll have one group. We have some folks down from Salt Lake down there. All right. Then we have folks up here. Niku just happens to live down that way anyway. So we're going to try to get, you're going to have to be patient with us because it's a lot to kind of organize, but we're going to try to get all these points randomly chosen this next week. And then we're going to sit down and we're just going to start putting together plans. All right. And so people that come up from, or people that are down in Salt Lake will give you the southern end area. And people up here will probably get up into Bear River and all that area. So we're going to be structuring it that way. We're going to be, if you don't have somebody that you are going to be partnered with, as you know, right? We're going to partner you with somebody. We're going to try to put teams together that have experience or some field experience at the lake. So we will also have days when DWR is going to meet a bunch of us, take us in an airboat somewhere, drop you off, do your survey, pick you up. We have ATVs that we'll be using, and we just bought some fat tire electric bikes. So we'll see how those work. I don't know. We'll see. There's not a lot of places that we can take ATVs because it does a lot of damage. There are some areas that we can and that we can't get to otherwise. So we're just going to be kind of flexible in that regard. And we need from you what your availability is for scheduling. And we'll start putting these little groups together. We're going to run 7 days a week. So Monday through Sunday, any of those times that you can work, you let us know, whether it's early in the morning or late in the afternoon. Okay? And we'll send out GPS units, radios, but we need it back for the next group. And so we'll try to have drop-off points and pick-up points. Okay? So, anything else we wanted to say?
No, we're just getting to the exercises.
Oh, I do have a couple things. One is that if you didn't sign up or sign in, make sure you do that. And then this second sign-up sheet here, or sign-in sheet, is just confirmation that you have received and that you will read, if you haven't, but will read the safety guide. There is also a little blurb up here that Forestry Fire and State Lands wanted us to put in. So some of you will be working on sovereign lands. It's just an acknowledgement that you're not going to hold them responsible if you break your leg or something. So make sure you do that. And I think that is all. We're going to take a short break. There's cookies and juice and probably 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll do 10 minutes, and then we're going to go outside and we're going to practice in the park.
But it recorded, but when you stepped over to the whiteboard, I had to like start on
Oh, okay.
the update, so it didn't
Okay.
pan for a little bit.
I don't know where it recorded on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You'll have to do your
That's-
best.
Well, it's okay. It's the department. So. That is the safe